The black volcanic sand burned through boot leather as if hell itself had risen from the Pacific depths. On February 19, 1945, 36,000 American Marines approached the shores of Iwo Jima, an 8-square-mile speck of Japanese territory that would soon become synonymous with unprecedented sacrifice and heroism. Admiral Chester William Nimitz had called this tiny island the most heavily fortified position in the world, and he spoke no hyperbole. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commanding 22,000 Japanese defenders, had spent 8 months transforming Iwo Jima into an underground fortress of interconnected tunnels, bunkers, and artillery positions carved deep into volcanic rock. The island's strategic importance was undeniable. Situated just 660 miles from Tokyo, it served as both an early warning system for mainland Japan and a refueling stop for American B-29 Superfortress bombers targeting Japanese cities. As the first wave of Marines from the 4th and 5th Marine Divisions hit the beaches at 0900 hours, an eerie silence greeted them. The expected devastating artillery barrage never materialized. Instead, Kuribayashi had ordered his men to wait, allowing the Americans to advance inland before unleashing hell from concealed positions. This tactical patience would prove devastatingly effective, transforming what military planners predicted would be a 5-day operation into 36 days of unimaginable carnage. Private First Class Ira Hamilton Hayes of the Pima tribe stepped onto that cursed sand alongside thousands of his brothers in arms, unaware that his image would soon become immortalized in one of history's most powerful photographs. The 22-year-old paratrooper from Arizona had volunteered for military service despite facing discrimination at home, driven by a desire to prove his patriotism and serve his country with honor. According to military historian Joseph Howard Alexander's definitive account, closing in Marines in the seizure of Iwo Jima, the initial landings proceeded with surprising ease, leading some optimistic Marines to joke about finishing the job ahead of schedule. However, Kuribayashi's deadly trap was about to spring. The Japanese commander had studied American amphibious tactics extensively, learning from previous Pacific defeats to create a defensive strategy focused on maximum attrition rather than preventing the initial landing. The sulfuric stench of the island's volcanic activity mixed with cordite and death as the first day's casualties mounted. Mount Suribachi, the extinct volcano dominating the southern tip of the island, loomed over the battlefield like a malevolent giant. Its honeycomb of tunnels and gun emplacements would soon become the focal point of some of the fiercest fighting in Marine Corps history. As darkness fell on that first day, 7,000 Marines had successfully established beachheads despite mounting resistance. They dug foxholes in the coarse volcanic sand, knowing that tomorrow would bring the real test of their resolve. None could have imagined that within 5 days, 6 of them would raise an American flag atop Mount Suribachi in a moment that would define American courage for generations to come. The stage was set for an epic confrontation between two determined forces, neither willing to yield an inch of blood-soaked ground. Dawn broke on February 20th with the fury of 10,000 demons as Kuribayashi's carefully orchestrated defense plan revealed its true horror. Hidden artillery pieces, mortars, and machine gun nests that had remained silent during the landing suddenly erupted in coordinated violence, transforming the beachhead into a killing field of unprecedented proportions. Sergeant Michael Strank, a 30-year-old Czech immigrant who had enlisted in the Marine Corps 9 years earlier, led his squad through the maze of Japanese defensive positions with methodical precision. The battle-hardened veteran of Bougainville understood that survival on Iwo Jima required different tactics than previous Pacific engagements. Here, the enemy remained invisible until the moment they struck, emerging from spider holes and tunnel entrances to inflict maximum damage before disappearing back into their underground labyrinth. The Marines quickly discovered that traditional tactics proved nearly useless against Kuribayashi's defense-in-depth strategy. Flamethrowers, bazookas, and demolition charges became the weapons of choice as small units methodically cleared each fortified position. The Japanese had learned bitter lessons from previous island defeats, abandoning costly banzai charges in favor of disciplined defensive fighting that extracted maximum casualties for every yard of ground. Corporal Harlan Henry Block, a 20-year-old Texan known for his quiet leadership and unwavering courage, found himself in command of his squad when their lieutenant fell to sniper fire on the second day. Block had grown up during the Great Depression, understanding hardship and sacrifice from an early age, qualities that served him well in the hell of Iwo Jima. His ability to remain calm under extreme pressure made him a natural leader among the younger Marines who looked to him for guidance. As referenced in Robert Sherrod's war correspondent reports for Time magazine, the volcanic terrain itself became a weapon against the attackers. The soft volcanic ash made movement difficult, while the hardened lava rock underneath proved nearly impervious to standard explosive charges. Every advance required engineers to blast pathways through seemingly impenetrable obstacles, often under direct enemy fire from multiple concealed positions. Private First Class Franklin Runyon Sousley, just 19 years old and fresh from the hills of Kentucky, experienced his first taste of combat on Iwo Jima's hellish landscape. The farm boy who had enlisted to escape rural poverty found himself thrust into fighting that exceeded his worst nightmares. Despite his youth and inexperience, Sousley's natural courage and determination to protect his fellow Marines earned him respect among the veterans in his unit. The Japanese defensive network proved more sophisticated than American intelligence had anticipated. Kuribayashi had positioned his strongest defenses not at the beaches, where they could be subjected to naval bombardment, but in the island's interior, where terrain advantages multiplied their effectiveness. Interconnected tunnels allowed defenders to reinforce threatened positions while remaining hidden from American observers. By the end of the second day, Marine casualties exceeded 2,000, with many units reporting 50% losses. The reality of Iwo Jima's defenses began to sink in among American commanders who realized their initial timeline estimates had been woefully optimistic. What they had planned as a quick operation to secure airfields was evolving into the costliest battle in Marine Corps history, demanding a level of sacrifice that would test the limits of human endurance. Mount Suribachi stood like a sleeping giant overlooking the southern beaches, its 546-foot summit crowned with Japanese observation posts that directed devastating artillery fire onto American positions below. The extinct volcano had been transformed into the centerpiece of Japanese resistance, honeycombed with tunnels and gun positions that seemed to sprout deadly fire from every rock crevice and shadow. Colonel Harry Bruce Liversedge's 28th Marine Regiment received the mission to isolate and capture this formidable strongpoint, a task that would require them to advance across 1,500 yards of open ground, swept by interlocking fields of machine gun fire. The regiment's 3 battalions approached their objective with grim determination, knowing that success would require extraordinary courage and unprecedented sacrifice from every Marine involved. Private First Class René Arthur Gagnon, a 20-year-old mill worker from New Hampshire, carried communications equipment for his unit as they began the methodical advance toward Suribachi's base. The young Marine had volunteered for service shortly after Pearl Harbor, driven by patriotic fervor that sustained him through brutal training and now faced its ultimate test in combat. His role as a messenger required constant movement between forward positions and command posts, exposing him repeatedly to enemy fire. The Japanese had spent months preparing Suribachi's defenses under Kuribayashi's meticulous supervision. Every cave entrance concealed multiple firing positions connected by tunnels that allowed defenders to appear and disappear at will. American flamethrower teams found themselves locked in deadly games of cat and mouse with defenders who knew every inch of their volcanic fortress. Pharmacist's mate. Second Class. John Henry Bradley, a Navy corpsman attached to the Marines, moved fearlessly across the battlefield to treat wounded comrades under intense enemy fire. The 21-year-old from Wisconsin had trained extensively in combat medicine, but nothing had prepared him for the scale of casualties he encountered on Iwo Jima. His medical bag seemed woefully inadequate against the devastating wounds inflicted by Japanese artillery and small arms fire. As documented in Bill D. Ross's comprehensive study, Iwo Jima Legacy of Valor, the assault on Mount Suribachi required a complete revision of standard Marine tactics. Traditional frontal attacks proved suicidal against the mountain's defenses, forcing small unit leaders to develop innovative approaches using cover and concealment to advance incrementally toward their objective. Progress measured in yards came at enormous cost in human life. The volcanic terrain itself seemed to conspire against the attackers. Loose volcanic ash made digging foxholes nearly impossible, while the underlying hardpan resisted entrenching tools and explosives. Marines found themselves exposed to enemy observation and fire with minimal protection, relying on speed and aggression to overcome defensive advantages that should have been insurmountable. By February 22nd, elements of the 28th Marines had reached the base of Mount Suribachi, but the real challenge lay ahead. The summit remained firmly in Japanese hands, its defenders prepared to exact a terrible price for every foot of elevation gained. American casualties continued mounting at an alarming rate, with some companies reduced to less than half strength after just 4 days of fighting. The stage was set for one of the most famous small unit actions in military history, though none of the participants could have imagined the lasting impact their courage would have on American memory and identity. At 08:15 on February 23rd, First Lieutenant Harold George Schreier led a 40-man patrol from Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines toward Mount Suribachi's summit. Their mission seemed straightforward: determine enemy strength on the mountain's peak, and if possible, secure the high ground that had dominated the southern beaches for 4 bloody days. What they accomplished would echo through history, though not in the way anyone expected. The patrol moved cautiously up the mountain's steep slopes, expecting fierce resistance at every turn. Japanese defenders had proven themselves masters of concealment and surprise, often allowing American units to advance before launching devastating counterattacks from concealed positions. However, as Schreier's Marines climbed higher, they encountered surprisingly light opposition, suggesting that the intense bombardment and ground assault of the previous days had taken their toll on Suribachi's defenders. Staff Sergeant Louis Raymond Lowery, a photographer for Leatherneck magazine, accompanied the patrol to document what military commanders hoped would be a significant tactical victory. The 35-year-old combat photographer had covered Marine operations throughout the Pacific, developing an eye for images that captured both the heroism and horror of amphibious warfare. His presence on Suribachi would prove historically significant, though his photographs would be overshadowed by events later that same day. As the patrol neared the summit, they discovered a piece of Japanese pipe that could serve as a makeshift flagpole. Sergeant Ernest Ivy Thomas, Jr., a 21-year-old from Ohio, and Platoon Sergeant Henry Oliver Hansen, a 24-year-old from Boston, worked together to secure an American flag to the improvised staff. At 10:20, they raised the Stars and Stripes over Mount Suribachi, while Lowery captured the moment on film. The first flag raising triggered immediate celebration across the beachhead below, where Marines and sailors who had endured days of murderous fire suddenly saw tangible proof of American progress. Ships' horns blared across the invasion fleet, while Marines cheered and waved helmets in triumph. However, their celebration was premature. Japanese resistance on Iwo Jima was far from broken, and the bloodiest fighting still lay ahead. According to James Bradley's extensively researched account, Flags of Our Fathers, Secretary of the Navy James Vincent Forrestal witnessed the flag raising from the command ship USS El Dorado and immediately declared his intention to claim the flag as a historical souvenir. This casual decision by a high-ranking official would inadvertently set in motion events that would create one of America's most enduring symbols of heroism and sacrifice. Colonel Chandler Johnson, commanding the 2nd Battalion, shared his men's elation but possessed the foresight to recognize the flag's historical significance. When informed of Forrestal's desire to claim the banner, Johnson ordered that the original flag be replaced with a larger one that would be more visible to Marines fighting across the island. This practical decision would result in the second flag raising that Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal would immortalize in his Pulitzer Prize-winning photograph. The first flag raising represented a tactical victory of enormous psychological importance, but it also marked only the beginning of organized resistance on Mount Suribachi. Japanese defenders had withdrawn deeper into the mountain's tunnel system, preparing for a desperate final stand that would test American resolve and cost additional lives before the position could be considered truly secure. As the original flag fluttered proudly from its improvised staff, few could have predicted that within hours a second flag raising would eclipse this moment in public memory, creating 6 heroes whose sacrifice would embody American courage for generations yet unborn. At approximately 1500 hours on February 23rd, 5 Marines and 1 Navy corpsman began their ascent of Mount Suribachi, carrying a larger replacement flag and a sturdy metal pole salvaged from a Japanese radio station. None of them sought fame or glory. They were simply following orders to replace the smaller flag with one more visible to their comrades fighting across the island's volcanic wasteland. History, however, had other plans for these 6 young Americans. Sergeant Michael Strank, at 30 years old, the senior man in the group, had immigrated from Czechoslovakia as a child and embodied the American dream of opportunity through service and sacrifice. His leadership experience from previous Pacific campaigns made him the natural choice to guide this seemingly routine mission. Strank understood that even simple tasks on Iwo Jima carried deadly risks, as Japanese snipers and hidden positions could turn any movement into a life-or-death struggle. Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal had arrived on Iwo Jima that morning, determined to capture images that would convey the reality of the battle to Americans back home. The 43-year-old photographer had covered combat throughout the Pacific theater, developing an instinct for positioning himself where historic moments might unfold. His decision to accompany the flag detail up Mount Suribachi would result in one of the most reproduced photographs in human history. As the 6 men reached the summit, they faced the practical challenge of raising their flag in ground hardened by volcanic activity and weakened by days of bombardment. The rocky soil resisted their entrenching tools, requiring all 6 to combine their strength in lifting and supporting the heavy metal pole. Corporal Harlan Block and Private First Class Ira Hayes positioned themselves to steady the base while Sergeant Strank and the others guided the flag into position. Rosenthal, initially positioned to photograph the actual flag-raising ceremony, found himself slightly out of position when the men began lifting the pole. Operating on pure professional instinct, he quickly adjusted his camera angle and captured the precise moment when all 6 men strained against the pole's weight, their bodies forming a composition that would become an enduring symbol of American determination and teamwork. As referenced in Carol Ann Marling and John Wettenhall's scholarly analysis, Iwo Jima, Monuments, Memories, and the American Hero, Rosenthal's photograph succeeded because it captured authentic human effort rather than posed heroism. The image showed ordinary Americans accomplishing an extraordinary task through collective determination, embodying values that resonated deeply with a nation that had endured 4 years of global warfare and sacrifice. The photograph's immediate impact exceeded anything Rosenthal could have imagined. Within hours of its transmission to the United States, newspapers across the country featured the image on their front pages. Radio commentators described the scene to audiences who hung on every word, desperate for positive news from the Pacific Theater. The flag raising provided a powerful symbol of American progress and determination that had been notably absent from previous reports about Iwo Jima's costly battle. However, the men in Rosenthal's photograph had little time to consider their emerging fame. Japanese resistance on Mount Suribachi continued sporadically for several more days, requiring constant vigilance and aggressive patrolling to eliminate remaining pockets of defenders. The mountain's capture represented only one phase of a battle that would continue for another month, exacting an ever-mounting toll in American lives and challenging the limits of human endurance. The flag raising had created an iconic moment. But the real test of these men's character would come in the days and weeks ahead, as the battle for Iwo Jima ground on with relentless fury. The euphoria surrounding Mount Suribachi's capture proved tragically short-lived as the true scope of Japanese resistance across Iwo Jima became apparent. While the flag flew proudly from the mountain's summit, 3 of the 6 men who had raised it would never see American soil again, their lives claimed by the volcanic island that had already consumed thousands of their comrades in arms. Sergeant Michael Strank, the Czech immigrant who had led the flag detail with quiet professionalism, fell to Japanese artillery fire on March 1st, just 6 days after his moment of immortality. The 30-year-old veteran of Bougainville was directing his squad's advance across the island's central plateau when an enemy shell found its mark, killing him instantly, along with several of his men. His death devastated the Marines who had looked to him for leadership and guidance through Iwo Jima's nightmare landscape. The battle's progression revealed the full extent of Kuribayashi's defensive masterpiece. After Suribachi's fall, American forces faced an even more formidable challenge in the island's northern sectors, where the Japanese commander had concentrated his strongest positions among rocky ridges and deep ravines that provided natural defensive advantages. Every advance required frontal assaults against prepared positions that extracted horrific casualties from attacking units. Corporal Harlan Block, the quiet Texan whose strength had helped steady the flagpole on Suribachi's summit, survived only until March 1st, when he too fell victim to Japanese mortars while leading his squad in an assault on enemy positions. The 20-year-old had written to his mother just days earlier, expressing hope that the battle would soon end and he could return home to help with the family ranch. His death left his unit without one of its most dependable leaders during the war's most challenging phase. Private First Class Franklin Sousley, the 19-year-old from Kentucky who had enlisted to escape rural poverty, lived until March 21st, just 5 days before the island was declared secure. The young Marine had grown from a nervous recruit into a seasoned combat veteran during Iwo Jima's 36 days of hell, earning the respect of older Marines through his courage under fire and willingness to risk his life for his comrades. A Japanese sniper's bullet ended his dreams of returning to the Kentucky hills he had loved since childhood. As documented in Richard Wheeler's comprehensive battle narrative, Iwo Jima, the 3 surviving flag raisers struggled with survivor's guilt that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They had participated in a moment that symbolized American triumph, yet they knew that victory had come at a price that exceeded anything their countrymen could imagine. The gap between public perception and battlefield reality created psychological burdens that would prove nearly impossible to bear. Private First Class Ira Hayes, the Pima Indian who had volunteered for service despite facing discrimination at home, found himself thrust into a celebrity role that conflicted with both his personality and his cultural background. The quiet young man from Arizona preferred anonymity to fame, but his status as a flag raiser made him a public figure whether he desired it or not. The pressure of representing American heroism would contribute to personal struggles that would plague him throughout his post-war life. The Battle of Iwo Jima officially ended on March 26, 1945, after 36 days of fighting that claimed nearly 7,000 American lives and wounded 20,000 more. Japanese casualties exceeded 20,000, with only a handful of survivors among Kuribayashi's garrison. The island's strategic value justified the enormous cost in military terms, but the human price would resonate through American consciousness for generations. The flag-raising photograph had given Americans a symbol of hope and determination during their darkest hours, but the men who created that symbol paid the ultimate price for their moment of immortality on a sulfuric island 8,000 miles from home. The war bond tours that followed the flag-raising photograph's publication thrust the three survivors into roles they never sought and were ill-equipped to handle. Private First Class Ira Hayes, pharmacist's mate John Bradley, and Private First Class Renee Gagnon found themselves transformed from ordinary servicemen into living symbols of American heroism, expected to embody virtues and sacrifices that felt increasingly distant from their personal experiences of war. Hayes, the Pima Indian from Arizona's Gila River Reservation, struggled most visibly with his newfound celebrity status. His tribal culture emphasized humility and collective achievement over individual recognition, making the constant attention and praise deeply uncomfortable for the 22-year-old Marine. During public appearances across the country, Hayes often appeared withdrawn and troubled, speaking reluctantly about experiences he would have preferred to forget. His discomfort was compounded by the irony of being celebrated as an American hero, while his own people continued to face discrimination and poverty on reservations across the Southwest. John Bradley, the Navy corpsman who had risked his life repeatedly to treat wounded Marines under fire, approached his celebrity role with characteristic stoicism and dedication to duty. The 21-year-old from Wisconsin understood that his participation in war bond rallies served a greater purpose, helping to finance the war effort that would bring his former comrades home safely. However, Bradley rarely spoke about his combat experiences in detail, preferring to focus public attention on the Marines he had served rather than on his own heroic actions. Renee Gagnon, the young mill worker from New Hampshire, initially embraced the attention and opportunities that came with his status as a flag raiser. The 20-year-old saw his fame as a chance to escape the limited prospects of his working-class background, pursuing opportunities in Hollywood and public speaking that seemed to offer a brighter future than returning to factory work. However, Gagnon soon discovered that celebrity based on a single moment could prove both fleeting and burdensome. According to James Bradley's meticulously researched account in Flags of Our Fathers, a work that drew extensively on his father John Bradley's personal papers and interviews, the three survivors shared a complex relationship with their fame that evolved over decades. They remained bound together by their shared experience on Mount Suribachi, yet each processed that experience differently based on his personal background and psychological makeup. The War Bond Tour itself represented a remarkable achievement in public mobilization, raising millions of dollars to finance the continued war effort in the Pacific. The flag-raising photograph provided a powerful visual symbol that connected emotionally with American audiences who had grown weary of casualty reports and rationing restrictions. The image's composition suggested triumph and progress, offering hope that victory was within reach despite the enormous sacrifices still required. However, the tours also created a disconnect between public perception and battlefield reality that troubled all three survivors. Audiences saw them as heroes who had participated in a moment of triumph, while they remembered fallen comrades whose sacrifices had received no recognition. The weight of representing not just their own experiences, but those of thousands of dead Marines created psychological pressure that would influence their entire post-war lives. The irony was inescapable. A photograph meant to inspire American determination had transformed its subjects into reluctant symbols of heroism they felt they didn't deserve, while their fallen comrades received recognition only through their survivors' testimonials. This burden of representation would prove as challenging as any enemy they had faced on Iwo Jima's volcanic slopes. Part 8. Legacy Written in Sulfur and Stone. The Battle of Iwo Jima officially ended on March 26, 1945, but its legacy would endure far beyond the last shots fired on that sulfuric island. The flag-raising photograph had captured something deeper than a military victory. It had crystallized the American spirit during the nation's greatest trial, creating a symbol that would inspire generations of Americans who never experienced the horror of combat, but understood instinctively the sacrifice it represented. Admiral Chester Nimitz's famous eulogy for the fallen Marines, "Uncommon valor was a common virtue," perfectly captured the essence of what made Iwo Jima's sacrifice so meaningful. The battle had demonstrated that ordinary Americans, drawn from farms, factories, and small towns across the nation, could accomplish extraordinary feats when called upon to serve something greater than themselves. The 6 men who raised the flag embodied this principle, representing the countless anonymous heroes whose courage made victory possible. The photograph's transformation into the Marine Corps War Memorial in Arlington, Virginia, ensured that the moment would be preserved in bronze for posterity. Sculptor Felix de Weldon's massive statue, dedicated in 1954, translated Rosenthal's 2-dimensional image into a 3-dimensional tribute that allowed visitors to walk around and experience the flag raising from multiple perspectives. The memorial became a pilgrimage site for veterans, families of fallen servicemen, and Americans seeking to understand the price of freedom. For the 3 surviving flag raisers, the decades following the war brought mixed blessings. John Bradley returned to Wisconsin, where he married, raised a family, and built a successful funeral home business while rarely speaking about his wartime experiences. His silence about Iwo Jima became legendary among family members and friends who learned not to ask about those 36 days that had defined his generation. Bradley's reticence reflected a common phenomenon among combat veterans who preferred to focus on building peacetime lives rather than reliving wartime trauma. Ira Hayes's post-war struggles became a tragic epilogue to the flag-raising story, highlighting the challenges faced by many Native American veterans who returned to reservations offering limited opportunities for advancement. Despite his fame as a national hero, Hayes battled alcoholism and depression that stemmed partly from survivor's guilt and partly from the contrast between his celebrity status and his people's continued marginalization. His death in 1955 at age 32 became a powerful symbol of how American society often failed its most vulnerable heroes. René Gagnon pursued various business ventures and public appearances throughout his life, never quite achieving the lasting success that his early fame had seemed to promise. The mill worker from New Hampshire discovered that celebrity based on a single moment could prove both a blessing and a burden, opening doors while simultaneously creating expectations that were difficult to fulfill. His experience illustrated the complex relationship between heroism and fame in American culture. As documented in Robert Sherrod's final reflections on the Pacific War, published in On to Westward, the Battle of Iwo Jima represented the culmination of American amphibious warfare tactics, developed over 3 years of costly island-hopping campaigns. The lessons learned in blood on that volcanic island would influence military doctrine for decades, though the human cost remained almost incomprehensible to those who had not experienced combat's reality. The flag-raising photograph ultimately succeeded because it captured an authentic moment of collective effort, rather than individual heroism. 6 young Americans had worked together to accomplish a simple task that took on profound symbolic meaning, embodying the cooperation and determination that had enabled their generation to defeat fascism and preserve democratic values. Their sacrifice on Mount Suribachi became a touchstone for American identity, reminding future generations that freedom requires constant vigilance and occasional ultimate sacrifice. Today, more than 80 years after that February morning when Marines first landed on Iwo Jima's black beaches, the flag-raising continues to inspire Americans facing their own challenges and uncertainties, proving that some images transcend their historical moment to become eternal symbols of human courage and national purpose.